So now we'll get on with the rest of the program. And today it is my pleasure to introduce David Wasserman. He is the U.S. House Editor and Quantitative Election Analyst for the nonpartisan Cook Political Report. We had the opportunity to have lunch with David here this afternoon, and I can tell you he's a brilliant young man, and I think we're all going to be in for a nice presentation. Nate Silver of the New York Times, the 538 blog, wrote, Wasserman's knowledge of the nooks and crannies of the political geography can make him seem like a local. I can certainly see that. And the Los Angeles Times recently called Wasserman's whip-smart and a scrupulously nonpartisan analyst whose numbers nerddom was foretold at a very young age. Mr. Wasserman served as an analyst for the NBC News Election Night Decision Desk in 2014, in 12, 10, and 2008. He's appeared on the NBC Nightly News, ABC News World Report, C-SPAN Washington Journal, CNN, and NPR. His commentary on the House races has also been cited in publications such as Politico, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, and Real Clear Politics. He served as a contributing writer to the 2014 and 2016 editions of the Almanac of American Politics as well. Prior to joining the Cook Political Report, Mr. Wasserman served for 3 years as House Director of Sabato's Crystal Ball, where he led the publication to correctly predict Democrats would score a gain of 29 House seats in the November 2006 election. That same year, he was awarded the Emmerich Wright Outstanding Thesis Prize for his study on the congressional redistricting standards. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming David Wasserman.
Thank you so very much, David, for that generous introduction. That was impeccable pronunciation, by the way. Scrupulously is not an easy word to say. And the last person who introduced me at a lunch actually introduced me by saying I was a scrumptiously nonpartisan analyst. So thank you very much for getting it right. But when I got this invitation, I was so excited to come here, not only because Ohio holds a special place in my heart. My grandfather grew up in the very northwest corner of the state, Williams County, Ohio, and he just turned 100, actually, in October. And we held a nice birthday celebration for him. He's an Ohio State class of 37. And I told him a couple years ago that he ought to go to his 75th reunion, but he said he didn't get the email. I'm not sure what was up there, but it's also a fascinating time to be a political analyst. I can't imagine a more exciting time to be in the field I'm in and to be talking about politics, especially in a state that's going to be as paramount in the 2016 election as yours. And when I think about the Republican race, I think St. Patty's Day is an appropriate analogy in the sense that it's kind of like a pub crawl. It's going to be the last one who staggers across the finish line. But what I see in D.C. today is almost a case of affluenza. The D.C. establishment has it really good. And for a long time, they haven't understood what's going on in much of the rest of the country. And now I think they're paying the price. So this is going to be an enormously exciting election, high-stakes election, and a fun one for all of us to watch. But most people are just asking me one question these days, David, who's going to be next in the White House? And there's no question we've had some interesting people and some interesting pets in the White House over the course of the last 20 years. There's Bill Clinton with Buddy, George W. Bush with Barney, and obviously Barack Obama with Beau. This is my prediction for who's next. This is Donald Trump's cat. And now, what's been amazing to me so far is that Donald Trump has won in just about every part of the country, except there's been a weak spot, and that's the Midwest. If you think about what we've seen in the early primaries, where has he lost? Well, first of all, he lost Iowa. Then he didn't do so well in Kansas or Oklahoma. He lost those to Ted Cruz. You think about Minnesota, he lost that to Marco Rubio. And then we get to Ohio, and he loses Ohio to John Kasich. What's going on? Well, I found photographic evidence the other day that his problem is he's been pandering too much in the Midwest. And maybe he needs to switch it up a little bit if he wants to do better in Wisconsin on April 5th. We'll see. But I've run out of adjectives to describe this election. You know, I've been calling it the Twilight Zone election for some time because I think the paranormal has become political reality this year for a couple reasons. Number one, a reality TV star who frequently falls for internet hoaxes is on the verge of hijacking and possibly imploding a political party that's been around for more than 160 years. But he is a walking and talking middle finger to the D.C. establishment, and that's what a lot of voters want to vote for this year. Number two, there is still a chance we could see the Republican Party's first contested convention since 1948. And we think of political conventions that are contested or brokered as the Loch Ness Monster of American politics. We never see them. In fact, we haven't seen them since 1948 on the Republican side, and it was just 4 years ago that we were talking about how we should scrap the political conventions altogether because, after all, what purpose do they serve? We already know who the nominees are going to be. That may not be true on the Republican side if Donald Trump doesn't get to 1,237 delegates by the beginning of June. And number three, with two unpopular frontrunners, Donald Trump's favorability with the overall electorate is only about 36%, but Hillary Clinton's is not much better at just 40%. I think there still is a small chance, a tiny chance, that an independent candidate could become a significant factor in the election. Now, I think the clock is ticking on that possibility. The most mentioned candidate was Michael Bloomberg. He's taken himself out of contention. And I don't think he would have been a viable candidate for the presidency anyway. He's someone who, as mayor of New York, alienated many on the left and in the minority communities as the stop and frisk mayor of New York, but also alienated most of the right as the anti-gun, anti-big gulp mayor of New York City. So who could possibly take up that mantle? Well, I think there is a vacuum on the mainstream conservative side of the Republican Party, many of whom would like to see an alternative on the ballot if Trump were the nominee. The problem is their efforts right now are going to stop him from getting a majority of delegates, and by the time we find out whether he's been stopped, it would be too late to get someone on the ballot. So their only option, I think, would be to hijack one of the minor parties that already exist, such as the Constitution Party, which would be a difficult endeavor. So I think that's the most remote possibility of these three. But it says a lot that the Republican Party's last hope to stop Donald Trump these days is a guy who has bragged he is so hated by his colleagues in the United States Senate that he needs a food taster with him in the Senate dining room. In fact, his college roommate said that he'd pick someone out of the phone book to be president over Ted Cruz. Now, there's no doubt this guy's a brilliant strategist. He's built the best micro-targeting operation to reach voters, and especially in southern and caucus states. And he has a great fundraising operation. He's also a master debater, although his detractors would like to take one syllable out of that line. Cruz is self-programmed to say just about everything that evangelical and purist conservatives want to hear. But Trump has successfully branded him as not only a liar, but a Canadian so far in this contest. I don't know which is worse, but you look at the results of the Maine caucus, which Ted Cruz won, and people were saying, how did Ted Cruz win Maine? Well, Donald Trump had the answer. Maine shares a long border with Canada. So then we get to John Kasich, your favorite hometown governor here. And how did John Kasich hold on to Ohio on Tuesday? Well, if you look at this map, it's pretty fascinating. In 2012, Mitt Romney won the Ohio primary by 1 point over Rick Santorum by carrying just 19 out of Ohio's 88 counties. John Kasich did a little bit better this time around. Not only did he win in white-collar suburbs along the I-71 corridor and all three of the Cs, but he also outperformed Romney in Northwest Ohio. Now, if you look at this map, what's striking about it? Well, Donald Trump, in red, was winning just about the entire Ohio River Valley. And in fact, his wins extended all the way north up to Lake Erie. But if you look at oil and gas country here, we're beginning to notice the impact of the frustration in Appalachian counties, with the D.C. establishment that's altogether different from the frustration that more of the agrarian northwest of Ohio seems to feel with Washington. It seems to be channeled in different ways. Donald Trump racked up huge margins in those counties. John Kasich's percentages seemed to track what Mitt Romney was getting there in 2012. But it was Columbus, it was the Northwest as well, that allowed John Kasich to do much better and win Ohio by 10 points, keeping his hopes alive. Now, John Kasich, according to a lot of people we knew who were close to him before he got into the race, was just about the only presidential candidate who could walk into a room full of friends and turn them into enemies by the time he was done with his remarks. But what we're seeing now... And John's got kind of a short fuse. But why is he in the final three here? Well, he is the only candidate in the Republican field who ran explicitly as a moderate. Marco Rubio was angling for a lot of those votes, but his problem may have been that he was too conservative for a lot of the Rockefeller Republicans who are remaining in places like New Hampshire and Vermont. In fact, the only places where John Kasich has outperformed Donald Trump so far in the primaries include Burlington, Vermont, Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Amherst, Massachusetts, and Arlington and Fairfax County, Virginia. The leftist hangouts of the country are the places where John Kasich is beating Donald Trump. And why is that important from here on out? Well, it turns out that there are a lot of Republican delegates at stake between now and June in leftist hangouts. Where are we going to see Republican primaries between now and June? Places like New York, places like California. And there are many Republican delegates at stake in heavily blue congressional districts where John Kasich, rather than Ted Cruz, could be Republicans' best chance to stop Donald Trump from getting delegates. So there's a question as to whether John Kasich's presence in the race helps or hurts Donald Trump. A lot of people were saying before Ohio's primary, well, the only way Donald Trump is going to lose is if it comes down to a one-on-one race between Trump and Ted Cruz. That might be true. We'll see. But I think it's important that John Kasich denied Donald Trump 66 delegates in Ohio. That's about 5% of what Donald Trump would need to get to 1237. But also, I think there are some regions of the country where only John Kasich could beat Donald Trump and not Ted Cruz. So we'll see. Now, how did we get here to this point in our politics? I think it's a lot like this road sign. Actually, I was giving a version of this presentation recently to a group of small-town mayors in Georgia, and this mayor in Georgia comes up to me after the talk, and he goes, "Excuse me, David, were you trying to make fun of me or something?" I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. He said, "You know that sign's in my town, right?" So the next time you find yourself in Griffin, Georgia, watch out for that bridge. But I have a theory about politics and how we got here, and it comes down to retail preferences and retail chains across the country. A couple years ago, I put together a study where I merged a GIS database that could map out all kinds of retail chains with at least 100 locations across at least 40 states, so sufficiently broad chains of restaurants or grocery stores, you name it. And I integrated it with a database of county-by-county election results going back to 1988. And the goal was to find out which two chains, one for Democrats and one for Republicans, are the best indicators of where Democrats and Republicans live and are getting their strength in the electorate. And if you had to guess what the highest Democratic scoring index chain was and the highest Republican scoring index chain was, what would you guess? Starbucks. Starbucks for Democrats, I'm assuming? Well, you're close. Walmart for Democrats or Republicans? Well, you're close on the Republican side. On the Democratic side, think a little bit more organic. Thank you. Who said Whole Foods first? You win some organic pomegranate juice. If you were standing in one of America's 419 Whole Foods markets, there is a 78% chance you're standing in a county that voted for Barack Obama in 2008. How about on the Republican side? Think a little bit more about food. Chick-fil-A is pretty close. Who said Cracker Barrel? Sir, yeah, I think you win some chicken and biscuits. Now, if you were standing in one of America's 638 Cracker Barrel Old Country stores, there is a 65% chance you're standing in a county that voted for John McCain, a 71% chance you're standing in a county that voted for Mitt Romney in 2012. Now, I don't mean to argue that if you love to shop at Whole Foods, you're a liberal Democrat, and if you love to stop at Cracker Barrel on your next road trip, you're a conservative Republican. I think we either are people or we know people who defy those stereotypes. But what I am trying to get across is if you live in a community where that brand of fresh and natural and organic and international has really taken off in the last 10 to 20 years, you likely live in a place that's gotten friendlier to Democrats. But if you live in a community where that brand of nostalgia and traditional values has maintained its appeal, you likely live in a community that's gotten friendlier to Republicans. This organic, nostalgic sort didn't just happen overnight. Back in 1992, when Bill Clinton won the White House over George H.W. Bush, he won 59% of counties that today have a Whole Foods and 40% of counties that today have a Cracker Barrel. That was a 19-point gap. Well, guess what? That gap's gone up every single election since then. In 1996, Bill Clinton stretched that to 23 points. In 2000, when George W. Bush won the White House, he won 75% of counties with a Cracker Barrel and 44% with the Whole Foods. That was a 31% gap. That went up to 39 points in 2004, went up to 43 points in 2008. And if you thought there was a Republican who was capable of stopping the bleeding for the Republican Party in Whole Foods country, it would be a button-down businessman like Mitt Romney, who's never lived more than 4.5 miles from a current Whole Foods market in his life. But what happened in 2012? Well, Obama won re-election, winning 75% of Whole Foods counties, 29% of Cracker Barrel counties, a 46-point gap, the widest we've ever seen. Just as an aside, I was going over these statistics with a group of young Democratic professionals in Arlington, Virginia. It was kind of a yuppie crowd. And there's a young woman in the front row who raised her hand, and she said, "Excuse me, did you mean Crate and Barrel? I've never heard of Cracker Barrel." And I thought, oh my God, the bubble mentality plaguing today's Democratic Party. But what do these chains really say about the country? Well, this polarization that we're seeing really comes down to higher education. It may be the great equalizer in our society, but it's now also the great polarizer. And where does Whole Foods centrally plan its stores? In areas with high levels of college education and attainment. Now, we've almost seen an inversion in preferences for the parties between voters who have college degrees and those who are blue-collar workers. And Democrats used to do very well with working-class Americans. These days, it's Republicans who are doing extremely well with working-class voters who haven't gone to a liberal arts school. It's Democrats who are doing much better with voters who have spent time at these elite colleges and universities. And so what have we seen? Well, particularly in oil and gas country, and Democrats think they have few energy voters left to lose. This is a swath of America that I call mines, hills, and drills. And it's been amazing to see the political trends over time. If you look at a place like Knott County, Kentucky, and this applies to Southeast Ohio as well, it's a place where Gore got 68.2% of the vote in 2000, but Obama got 25.6% of the vote in 2012, down 42.6%. Now that's coal country. Let's go to oil and gas country in Cameron Parish, Louisiana, where Gore got 35.6, Obama got 11.1% of the vote, down 24.5. And so Democrats think that because they're so strong these days with well-educated white-collar workers in cities, they can afford to lose large portions of energy-producing America. And you heard Hillary Clinton the other night at the Democratic town hall say that her plan would put coal miners and coal companies out of business. Well, her campaign may not think that West Virginia is in play, but I'll tell you what, that's a big problem in Southeast Ohio. It's a big problem in Southwest Virginia, and it's a big problem in Western Pennsylvania. That's where this election in 2016 will be won or lost, and that's why your industry and your voters are so critical to what happens in November. Now, Democrats may be losing Southeast Ohio. That's been true for a while. But the question is, do they get 40% of the vote there, or do they get 30 or 25% of the vote there? If it's 30 or 25, their job gets a whole lot easier when it comes to winning Ohio and winning the Electoral College. And Donald Trump right now is crushing it in Cracker Barrel country. If you look at voters, at Republican voters with college degrees, what we're seeing is that the field has been quite split. Donald Trump has been losing that demographic narrowly. But among voters with no college degree, Donald Trump has been winning sometimes by as many as 25 points. And Trump's assaults on political correctness, his assaults on the political donor class, on media elites have struck a huge nerve, even without embracing a traditional Republican agenda. This is a guy who donated to Hillary Clinton. This is a guy who has expressed support for Planned Parenthood. This is a guy who derides Paul Ryan's entitlement reform plans. You'd think this guy is someone who would never get anywhere in a Republican primary. But he's not a politician, and that makes all the difference. Now, Marco Rubio and John Kasich have done just fine in Whole Foods country. Just look at John Kasich's margins in Franklin County on Tuesday. But there are very few Whole Foods Republicans left in the Republican Party. Now, there's no question that Donald Trump fits the narrative of a classic political strongman. The centerpiece of his campaign is not a series of lengthy policy proposals. It's his own strength, superiority, and success, whether it's real or imagined. Does anyone actually think Trump Steaks is a real business? But if you have a half hour of free time, even if you're a Democrat, and you had the choice between watching Donald Trump's news conference and Hillary Clinton's, whose would you tune into? The answer is pretty obvious. He's unscripted, he's unpredictable, he's entertaining, and he proposes catchy, almost irresistibly simple solutions to complex problems that the expert class and a dysfunctional Congress has failed to address, and they have failed to address them. But he wouldn't be possible without an extremely weak Republican Party. After the Bush-era bailouts and two failed establishment Republican presidential nominees who are supposedly electable, the conservative base is totally estranged from D.C. leadership. How do we know this? Well, Rubio and Kasich, up until Tuesday, had won 73% of endorsements from Republican members of Congress and governors among the four candidates remaining in the race at that time, but they had combined for just 28% of the vote. And there's also been a great deal of passivity and resignation among the Republican elite class. Anti-Trump ads accounted for just 9% of all ads run before Super Tuesday. Now it's up to 47%, but by now it's way too late to define him. We've also noticed this decline in party affiliation over time. The number of self-identified independents who reject both parties is at an all-time high. 43% of Americans describe themselves as members of neither party. And so this is producing a couple different trends. At the congressional level, we're not seeing these independents participate in the party primaries that select nominees. So we're seeing both parties distill down to their ideological ends of the spectrum. And that produces a government in Washington that fails to cooperate, fails to compromise, fails to get things done. There used to be blue dog Democrats in southeastern Ohio in Congress. That's simply not the case anymore. There used to be fairly moderate Republicans. There still are a few in northeast Ohio, but their numbers are dwindling in Congress. We also have a news media in economic distress. The Pew Research Center reports that the median daily audience for Fox, CNN, and MSNBC has declined 11% since 2008. That has meant that these news outlets have needed Donald Trump as much as Donald Trump has needed them. And since his campaign's launch in June, Trump has accounted for 55% of all candidate mentions on cable news, which has meant there's no oxygen for any of the other candidates. We also have a record distrust in mainstream news media, particularly among Republican voters. 58% of Democrats say they still have a fair amount or a great deal of trust in mainstream news outlets. Only 31% of independents and 26% of Republicans say the same. So every time the mainstream media calls out Trump for some outrageous or offensive statement he makes, it only makes him stronger. And you start wondering after a while, we have this record distrust of Congress. Who are these 9 or 12 or 15% of Americans who like the job that Congress is doing? And Gallup actually commissioned an in-depth survey to try and identify who these people are who like the job that Congress is doing. And curiously enough, they found out that they all live in Colorado. I'm not sure why that might be the case, but maybe you can fill me in. So where are we going from here? Well, there's no doubt that we're seeing blue-collar revolts in both parties, led by people who weren't even members until recently. I think Democrats' divisions can heal, but man, Republicans are going to have some fence mending to do, and they should be terrified of a great crack-up in their party. Now, there's no question on the Democratic side, millennials are feeling the burn. And, for example, in Michigan, Bernie Sanders won 18 to 29-year-olds 81 to 19. In New Hampshire, he won them 84 to 14. These are like Kim Jong-un numbers for Bernie Sanders in these places. And speaking of that, the newest generation of voters has not been around long enough to remember the Cold War. And so this knock that he's a socialist, well, they say socialism, that's great. I love social media. Now, there's also major Clinton fatigue. The newest voters in 2016 were just 2 years old when the Clintons left office. So to them, the Clintons are old news. And they can't relate to Hillary Clinton when they have high student debt, but she's taking $600,000 in speaking fees from Goldman Sachs. So there's no question that Bernie Sanders has awakened a new generation of voters on the left. He's pushed her farther to the left on issues like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and he's also exposed her general election weaknesses. Now, in terms of the delegate math, I think Hillary's got this, but Bernie will keep fighting until June. Now, Hillary Clinton started out with a massive lead of 449 superdelegates to 19 for Sanders. These are the party officials and elected leaders who are automatic delegates to the Democratic Convention in Philadelphia. And so that meant Bernie Sanders started out about 10 points behind before even any votes were cast. Now, Clinton swept all 5 contests on Tuesday. And she won huge margins with African Americans and Latinos. And so at this rate, Bernie would need about 66% of the remaining delegates just to tie Clinton. That's virtually impossible given that Democrats allocate their delegates on a proportional basis in every single state. There are no winner-take-all states where Bernie Sanders can make up a huge delegate deficit. So for all intents and purposes, I think the Democratic race is over no matter how many contests Bernie Sanders wins between now and the New York primary on April 19th. But Hillary's real challenge is November. And the fundamentals of this election argue that Republicans should win the White House. There's a tremendous anti-dynasty sentiment out there. 60% of voters in a recent Colorado focus group said that they would pass a hypothetical law banning anyone with the last name Clinton or Bush from ever running for office again. And time for change usually beats stay the course. The NBC Wall Street Journal survey asks voters towards the end of every president's administration, would you prefer the next president to adopt the same approach as the current one or adopt a different approach? Well, in 1999, at the tail end of the Clinton administration, 44% said same approach, 45% said different approach. That election basically ended in a tie. In 2007, at the end of the George W. Bush administration, 23% said same approach, 71% said different approach. We all know how that election turned out. Where were we at the end of 2015? Well, we were at 30% same approach Obama, 67% different approach. These are numbers that are a whole lot closer to where George W. Bush was than where Bill Clinton was in 1999. And that argues for a Republican win. There's just one catch. Today's Republican Party is about to detonate a nuclear bomb on itself. And there's no doubt that Donald Trump continues to benefit from badly divided opposition. If you look at this in terms of March Madness, and I hope you all filled out your brackets and are doing better than me, but if you look at this as a series of NCAA brackets, well, Donald Trump's pretty much had a bracket all to himself. It's the anti-politician bracket. Ted Cruz for a long time was battling it out with Ben Carson to be the front runner in the social conservative or evangelical bracket. And then the most crowded lane of all, the most crowded bracket was the establishment bracket of Republicans who care more about lower taxes than social issues. Well, that was divided for a long time between Rubio, Kasich, and Jeb Bush. Who thought that John Kasich would be the last one standing? But these candidates fought so much amongst themselves, and now we still have John Kasich and Ted Cruz who are splitting the anti-Trump vote. My favorite was the NIT bracket of candidates who were semi-interesting but didn't get anywhere. And my favorite in this bunch was Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, who, by the way, just endorsed Ted Cruz. Lindsey Graham's a bachelor. He's unmarried, and so he was promising a rotating first lady. I thought that was kind of a novel concept. It's a little bit different than what you get with Hillary Clinton, which is a roving first man. Now, remember, this is a race for 1,237 Republican delegates, and by the end of March, 65% will have already been decided. So this is really the Ides of March. This is the key month of the Republican primaries. And where do we stand today? Well, Donald Trump is at 691 delegates out of the 1,237 he'd need. He's at about 96% of the target I estimate he would need to be on pace. Ted Cruz is at 422, John Kasich's at 145. This means that Trump would need 53% of the remaining delegates to get to 1237. That sounds like it's a pretty difficult feat when he's winning just about 37% of the votes so far and only 47% of the delegates awarded so far. But guess what? He's able to win these primaries with just tiny fractions of the overall electorate. And this comes down to a law of unintended consequences. After 2012, the RNC changed delegate allocation rules to give front-running candidates an opportunity to lock up the nomination early. They thought that after Mitt Romney spent so much time battling Rick Santorum and Newt Gingrich, well, heck, we need to give our front-runner more time to actually beat the Democrat in the fall. So they set up these rules that reward whoever's ahead early, and it's backfired on them because they had no idea that Donald Trump would be the front-runner. And so you look at these primary contests. For example, in Nevada, Donald Trump won 46% of the caucus votes there. He won just 1.8% of eligible Nevada voters. And so very tiny fractions of the American electorate are deciding this Republican nomination. And on March 15th, the rules changed. Trump pluralities start giving him 100% of delegates in a variety of contests. If you look at the way that delegates are apportioned from state to state, there are only a few states in dark green that are pure winner-take-all states. That includes Florida and Ohio, which we just saw, Arizona, which votes on March 22nd, on Tuesday, and then we have Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, New Jersey, Delaware. But there are also a variety of other states in lime green, like Missouri, Illinois, Wisconsin, which award their delegates on a winner-take-all by congressional district basis. So if you imagine these districts as miniature states, and Donald Trump is winning all of these miniature states, he's winning all of the delegates at stake there. It's not really proportional. So with 37% of the vote or even 45% of the vote, he could end up winning 100% of the delegates from these places. Now, there are 3 key dates left in the primaries on the Republican side. I'm calling Tuesday the Southwester because we have Utah and Arizona voting on Tuesday. And this is a key contest for not only Trump, but Ted Cruz. We expect Donald Trump is going to win Arizona and all 58 of its delegates. But then we have Utah. And I'm not sure that Mormon Utah is going to be warm and fuzzy to a 3-time divorced brash billionaire from New York who is as vain and profane as he is. Now, we already saw at Liberty University in Virginia, even after Jerry Falwell Jr. endorsed Donald Trump finished in 4th place at Liberty with only 7% of the vote. So among very religious voters, he's not performing all that well. I expect Ted Cruz to do very well in Utah. The question is whether he clears 50% of the vote. If Ted Cruz gets 50% of the vote in Utah, he automatically wins all 40 Utah delegates. That would go a long way towards stopping Trump. So watch what happens in Utah on Tuesday. Then on April 26th, after a long pause, we get to the nor'easter. We have primaries in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. New York votes the week before. So this is the part of the country where John Kasich needs to do well if he's to play any role in stopping Trump, but I still expect Trump to do very well in a lot of these states. Then we get to the grand finale, and this race will be decided on June 7th. It's going to go all the way down to the wire. There's no way it's going to end before then. California, New Jersey, Montana, South Dakota, and New Mexico all vote on June 7th. So watch how popular Donald Trump is in California, because that's going to decide whether he gets the nomination or not. Now, Cruz's best hope from now on is closed primaries and caucus states. If you look at the states that have voted so far, Ted Cruz has tended to do much better in states that have caucuses and closed primaries. In other words, Democrats and independents can't vote in them, than he has done in open primaries. So far, Trump has won 14 out of 16 open primaries, only losing Texas and Ohio, which are Ted Cruz and John Kasich's home states. But Cruz has won almost half of the closed primaries and caucuses, including Kansas, Oklahoma, Iowa, Maine, et cetera. So far, just 43% of delegates have been at stake in these closed primaries. But between now and June, 73% of delegates will be. And so that is a little bit of a boost for Ted Cruz. The bottom line here is that we could see a convention in Cleveland that is more chaotic than a Johnny Manziel weekend in Vegas. Because 61% of delegates overall are awarded proportionally. That means that it's very difficult for any one candidate to get to the magic number of 1237. 2016 really could be that the first time in close to 60 years or 70 years that we have a multi-ballot Republican convention. What would happen if that were the case? Well, keep in mind that after the first ballot, most of the delegates who are bound to one candidate based on the results of primaries are free to vote their conscience and support whoever they want. Theoretically, there are a lot of Trump delegates out there who have to vote for Trump on the first ballot, but really don't want him to be the nominee, especially if polls show him in July to be losing the general election to Hillary Clinton. So it's a big difference. If he gets stopped just short and this thing goes to a contested convention, his odds of winning the nomination go way down. But the key could also be what happens in that month and a half between the end of the primaries and in July. Does Donald Trump cut deals with delegates to get him over the top? I think that is a live possibility as well. Looking ahead to November, what are we likely to see? Well, in Congress, Republicans are headed for triage mode. Their worst nightmare was having either Trump or Cruz as their nominee, because Republicans in red states and districts have no choice but to endorse Trump to survive a future primary. Republicans in blue states and districts may have no choice but to renounce him to win a general election. Now, in the House, Republicans are sitting on their largest majority since 1928, but if it's Donald Trump, anything is possible. I think this just pushes a lot of House races into an unpredictable place. Now, Democrats' challenge is steep because 94% of Republican members of Congress won their races by more than 10% in 2014. So there aren't a whole lot of obvious targets out there for Democrats, particularly in Ohio, where the filing deadline and the primary has already passed at the congressional level. But in other states, we're watching to see how many Democrats jump into these congressional races because they feel like Trump gives them a good opportunity to win. The answer is that Democratic gains could get into the double digits, but keep in mind they would need 30 seats to take back the chamber. I still think it's a very remote possibility, but we can't rule anything out. Now, in the Senate, Republicans in blue states need to run far away from Trump if he's the nominee, if they want to win. There are 7 Republican Senate seats up for election in states that Obama won in 2012. There's only one Democratic seat up in a state that Romney won, and we have twice as many Republicans up for election as Democrats overall. Republicans are at 54 seats in the Senate to just 46 for Democrats, so Democrats would need to pick up 4 seats plus the vice presidency to pick up majority control of the Senate, and of course the Supreme Court. Now, if we look at who those 7 Republicans in blue states are, well, the most vulnerable Republican incumbents in the country are Mark Kirk in Illinois and Ron Johnson in Wisconsin. I think Democrats probably pick up those 2 seats, and so they would need 2 more to get over the top. Where would those 2 come from? Well, I'm looking right at Ohio. Senator Portman, I think, would have every advantage in terms of his reelection because he's been, for the most part, a very diligent, constituent services-oriented senator who has carved out a reputation apart from his party as an independent thinker, as a policy wonk, as someone who has broken with the Republican Party on some social issues, is regarded as a moderate. But in this day and era, most members of Congress are defined by the top of their tickets. And what did we see in 2012? Well, Sherrod Brown's results closely tracked Obama's results in the Senate election. So if we see a Trump loss of more than 5 points in Ohio, I think the odds are that Ted Strickland will be part of a new Democratic Senate majority. It's going to be a very, very close race, and we have it in our toss-up column. There's also going to be a close race in New Hampshire, where Kelly Ayotte is up for re-election, Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey, and then we also have Marco Rubio's open Senate seat in Florida, Chuck Grassley's seat in Iowa, which is a longer shot for Democrats, but not entirely out of the question. And why are the stakes so high? Well, not only do we have a Supreme Court vacancy, but we have 3 additional justices who are over the age of 75. For a long time, we've had a Supreme Court that is a testament to advancements in pharmaceutical medicine. And so there's a strong likelihood that the next president will make several Supreme Court nominations. And the Senate will have a big role in confirming that. Now, could we see the vacancy filled before the next president takes office? The only way I see that happening is if Hillary Clinton were to win the general election. Democrats would take control of the Senate, and Republicans would say that Merrick Garland is a better bet than anyone that Hillary would nominate. So I think Republican obstructionism is going to become a Democratic campaign theme in these Senate races. Looking ahead to the Electoral College in the presidential race, well, if you subtract the 12 states that Obama won by less than 10% and that Romney won by less than 5%, each party starts out with 191 Electoral College votes. That means that only 12 states will matter in this presidential election, and you are one of them. Now, you've always been one of them. But I don't see any way for Republicans to put the White House back in their column without winning both Florida and Ohio. If they lose either one, there's no route for Republicans to win the White House. So where do they need to win on top of that? Well, they'd still be a few Electoral College votes short, but I think their next best bet might be either Virginia or Pennsylvania. And given that this election is really coming down to trade and the Rust Belt, I think Pennsylvania might even be a better opportunity for Republicans than Virginia. So we'll see. Now, I think Marco Rubio was probably Republicans' best November option, and John Kasich probably is still Republicans' best November option after Rubio dropped out. But if you look at the hypothetical matchup between Hillary Clinton and Rubio, Cruz, and Trump among 8 key voter groups that tend to decide what happens in these battleground states, there is a serious electability gap here. Among Latinos, I think to have any chance of winning the White House, Republicans need to keep keep Democrats' margin among Latino voters to about 25 points or less. Rubio, in the March 2016 NBC Wall Street Journal poll, was losing Latinos by only 23 points. Ted Cruz was down 30, Donald Trump was down 45 points with Latinos. White college-educated voters, Marco Rubio was up 11, Ted Cruz was up 2, Donald Trump down 10. You see the pattern up and down the array of key voter groups here. So what went wrong with Rubio? I think Republicans saw the second coming of Barack Obama, and they didn't like it. Now, here was a guy who had a hopeful and optimistic message and shared a lot of life parallels with Obama, both born into immigrant parentage, served 8 years in a backwater state legislature, launched a long-shot Senate bid, became an overnight celebrity in their party, but compiled relatively few accomplishments in their first term and grew kind of restless. They launched an uphill presidential run. The front runner happened to be a family member of the immediate previous president. In Barack Obama's case, that was Hillary Clinton. In Marco Rubio's case, that was Jeb Bush. And the general election opponent is 24 years older and lost the presidential race 8 years beforehand. In Obama's case, that was John McCain. In Rubio's case, it's Hillary Clinton. Now, the key question, if it is Clinton versus Trump, could it be a total blowout for Democrats? It could be. But most Democrats I talk to aren't entirely sure of what will happen. After all, Donald Trump has proven once before that he's a master reinvention artist, that he is capable of saying anything and doing anything that is necessary to win a political election. And the thing is, he admits it, which is refreshing to a lot of voters. And so it really comes down to the economy. Gallup asks the question, do you think economic conditions in the country as a whole are getting better or getting worse? And back in November 2012, when Obama was running for re-election, 47% said better, 48% said worse. February 2016, 39% said better, 57% said worse. And so perceptions of the economy are a little bit different from what we look at when we see that gas prices are low, wages are up. There is still an immense anger at the unevenness of the economic recovery across the country that could end up allowing Trump to get back in this thing. And to win the general election, Republicans, I think they need more non-white voters. In 1980, and of course we saw the sad passing of Nancy Reagan a couple of days back. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan won the White House, he won 56% of white voters. He won by 10 points. He got 489 electoral college votes. It was a total landslide. Fast forward to 2012, Obama lost the white vote. Mitt Romney got 59% of the white vote, 3 points higher than Reagan. Loses the election by 4 points, gets slaughtered in the electoral college. What happened? Well, the white share of the electorate went down from 88% in 1980 to 72% in 2012. It's going to be 70 or 71% in 2016. Can Trump find a way to rehabilitate his image with Latinos, where his disapproval is currently 81%, and with African Americans, where his disapproval is even higher? We'll see. Republicans also need to address its empathy problem, the party's empathy problem. The exit poll in 2012 asked which one of these 4 candidate qualities mattered most in deciding how you voted for president. Among 27% of voters, the highest characteristic was shares my values. Romney won those voters 55-42. Among 18%, it was I want a strong leader. Romney won them 61-38. 29% said I want a candidate who has a vision for the future. Romney won them 54-45. But among the 21% of voters who said I want a candidate who cares about people like me, Obama won them 81-18%. Republicans can't afford to nominate a candidate who can be portrayed as a corporate robber baron. And they may end up with one who is rather easily portrayed as a corporate robber baron for his series of bankruptcies. That will be the key Democratic message in the fall. Can Trump figure out a way, once again, to change the narrative in his favor with his huge megaphone? We'll see. I'll just leave you with one statistic before we open it up to questions. This is the map of 2012 election results by county, and if you see how much red is on this map, you would have thought that Mitt Romney won the election. Obama won 62% of all electoral college votes, but just 48% of all congressional districts and just 22% of the country's counties. If you pretended for a moment that just 3 counties out of 3,141 did not exist, if you pretended that Miami-Dade County, Florida, Cuyahoga County, Ohio, and Philadelphia County, Pennsylvania did not exist, Obama would have lost Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and without those 3 states, he would have lost the general election to Mitt Romney. And so it's not lost on the parties how important these locations are. Where's the Democratic convention being held? Philadelphia County, Pennsylvania. Where's the Republican convention being held? Cuyahoga County, Ohio. And where were 2 of Republicans' presidential candidates from? Miami-Dade County, Florida. On election night in 2016, if there's one county to watch out of America's 3,141, I would argue it's Vigo County, Ohio. How many people have been to Terre Haute, Indiana in this room? I'm assuming a fair amount. Why watch Vigo County, Indiana? It is the only county out of America's 3,000 that has voted with the winner in every presidential election since 1956. And so those of you from Stark County, Ohio, your bellwether status has been eclipsed. With that, let me see if there are any questions or comments or accusations in the room. I know politics is on your minds, so don't be shy. Anyone? Yes, sir. You know, I think Donald Trump has been much more strategic than the pundits give him credit for. A lot of people look at his canceled rally in Chicago, Illinois, and they said, well, planning that rally was an act of provocation. He was just egging on protesters to come out from Chicago's inner cities and shut down his rally, and he was looking for a fight. That's not entirely true. You know why? Donald Trump knew that there were 24 delegates at stake in Cook County, Illinois. According to the Republican National Committee's rules, each congressional district gets 3 delegates, regardless of how blue or red it is. So you have these African-American majority districts with just a handful of Republican voters living in them that are deciding a huge number of delegates. And guess what? Donald Trump won nearly all of the districts and all of the delegates in Chicago, Illinois. So that wasn't an accident, and I think you'll see the same strategic thinking on the part of his campaign that, frankly, has surprised and outperformed a lot of the other campaigns. Yes, sir.
One of your slides you talked about how at the convention itself, after the first ballot, the delegates would be freed up to vote. I'm just curious, on the first ballot, let's say I'm a Trump delegate and I vote for Kasich. What are the consequences if I did that?
There wouldn't be any. And that's the amazing fact of the Republican convention. Now, let's say Donald Trump, by the end of the primaries, has 1,200 delegates. That would be 37 short of what he needs to clinch the nomination. I think he could easily corral 37 delegates from the pool of uncommitted delegates and unbound delegates that will come from a variety of states. he could cut deals with those folks. He could also take advantage of several candidates releasing their delegates after they've dropped out of the race. We'll see if that happens. We'll see what the Rules Committee decides. But the fact is, if he's at 1,100 as opposed to 1,200, he's going to be hard-pressed to find enough to get him to 1,237. It will probably go to a second vote. And if there's a second vote, then, man, I think you're going to see a lot of delegates who are technically bound to him on the first ballot who are then freed up to support. My guess is more Ted Cruz than John Kasich.
Just to be clear, I'm saying on the first ballot.
Yeah.
You're supposed to vote for Trump.
Right. Oh, on the first ballot, if you're a bound Trump delegate, you cannot, according to RNC rules. You can't. In fact, there's no ballot box. Every state's delegation is called on the roll of states, and the state has to announce its delegate allotment in line with the results of the primaries in states where delegates are bound. So that would not happen. But I will tell you this. I think there are going to be melees at the Republicans' credentials committees in advance of the vote. There will be so many disputes as to how many delegates are allowed to vote their conscience on the second ballot, or how many delegates are free to do what they want on the first, that I think it's going to take weeks to sort out all the disputes. Someone's going to have to rule this convention with an iron fist. Yes, sir. That's a great question. How many Democrats crossed over in Ohio and voted for Kasich, presumptively? I think it's hard to say. Looking at the voter file in Ohio, we noticed that there was a much higher crossover rate of voters who had participated in the 08 or 12 Democratic primaries who came over in the Republican primary to vote this time than vice versa. Was it enough that John Kasich won the primary? I don't think it was enough to help him win on Tuesday. But it also raises the question of, are these participation numbers a harbinger of what we're likely to see in November? A lot of people are saying, well, there's been higher Republican turnout in these primaries. Does that mean that Republicans have the edge in November? I'm doubtful of that because we've simply had a more dramatic contest on the Republican side than we've had on the Democratic side. I think that'll continue to be the case. Yes, sir.
Yes. Who do you see as a vice presidential candidate for either of the two front-runners, Cruz and Trump?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Who would the VPs be? Well, I really think it depends on the circumstances of the Democratic side. Assuming we have Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump is going to need to balance out his ticket with someone who has government experience and can reassure voters that he's a legitimate contender for the presidency. I think he knows that, and he's admitted that. Would it be Chris Christie? I'm pretty doubtful. I think Chris Christie's only path to relevance was to endorse him because his approval rating back in New Jersey is about 26%. But ever since, it seems like Trump has done little things that kind of throw Christie under the bus. I doubt that John Kasich would accept a spot on Trump's ticket. I doubt that Marco Rubio would accept a spot on the ticket. But what about a guy like Scott Walker from Wisconsin who dropped out of the race with dignity a while back? I wouldn't completely rule out his acquiescence when it comes to Trump. If it were Ted Cruz, man, good luck trying to find someone to run on that ticket, right? No, I think Ted Cruz's ticket would probably involve cutting a deal with someone who still has a large number of delegates in the contest to join him as a running mate on a unity ticket to overthrow Trump. Now, the rules on this are very murky because if there is a contested convention, the vice presidential nomination is supposed to be settled in the same way as the presidential nomination. So it's unclear whether Cruz could go up to Kasich or Rubio and say, hey, be my vice president, put me over the top of this convention, we'll run as a ticket. But if they were to try and strike that deal, it'd be interesting to see whether they could get it through. Yes, sir.
Based on Hillary Clinton's earlier, less nuanced position versus when she was in Ohio and gave a little more expansive answer. Do you think in Ohio and Western PA that if she continues to move a little farther to the right, or will that be seen as flip-flopping, or do you think that will have any impact as she gets into the general election?
Are you referring to
as far as fracking?
Yeah.
And she kind of said, well, there's certain things I can't do, and gave certainly a more nuanced answer.
Right, that's a great question, and you can tell that Hillary Clinton wants more leeway for the general election than Bernie Sanders has been giving her. You know, she's been forced just about as far to the left as she can possibly go without breaking something, and I really have a hard time seeing how she can come back to Ohio and talk about fracking and natural gas as a part of an energy revolution after everything she's gone through in this Democratic primary. But I'll tell you what, I think she will play a lot better in Ohio in a general election than a guy who basically honeymooned in the Soviet Union and had nice things to say about Fidel Castro in the 1980s. So, if I were Hillary Clinton in Ohio, I would probably not talk a lot about energy. I would rather talk about the companies that Donald Trump has bankrupted and the creditors that he's screwed. I think it would be Bain 2.0, where you saw those ads in the beginning of 2012 that Obama ran against Romney. They weren't enough to allow him to win a lot of rural counties that used to be Democratic counties along the Ohio River, but his margins there were not. But Romney's margins there were not 50 points; they were more like 20 or 30 points, and that made a difference in allowing Obama to win Ohio. Yes, ma'am.
What are your thoughts or opinions on the email scandal for Hillary, and how does that impact it?
It's a terrific question that all of us struggle to answer. How will Hillary's email scandal impact this race? I think there's probably only about a 15 or 20% chance that she gets indicted. But if I were a front runner for a major party nomination for president and there were a 15 or 20% chance of an indictment, I still would have trouble sleeping at night. And so the question is, if it happens, what's the timing of it? If it's before the Democratic convention, I think it's already beyond the point where Democrats can kind of break the glass and call Joe Biden on the red phone. Bernie Sanders has too many delegates for that. But if it were in the general election, I think Democrats would do their best to try and turn it into a partisan issue. And if it's hurt Hillary Clinton so far, I think it's hurt her because it plays into this narrative. It feeds into the narrative that the Clintons are above the law, that they've been getting away with an awful lot for a very long time, that that they live inside a bubble, that the rules don't apply to them, and voters have very hardened views on that question already. So to be honest, I'm not sure that an indictment would massively change public opinion towards Hillary Clinton. She's already underwater. I think she's already made the case that this is that this is overclassification run amok, that the same scrutiny should be applied to others who have been in her positions in the past, and those who are supporting her are voters that I think would stand by her in that circumstance. Yes, sir. Oh, I saw a hand here. Yes, sir.
Do you think at any point the Clinton Foundation and Hillary's relationship with the Clinton Foundation and the money that it receives from foreign entities will become a political issue?
I think it already has become a political issue. We noticed over the course of the last year that Hillary Clinton's favorability with the overall electorate, it started around 50%. She was regarded as a diplomat, a trailblazer, a well-respected world figure. And as you saw more drip out about the email scandal, but also about ties that foreign governments had to the Clinton Foundation, you noticed her popularity start to tumble into the zone of a politician. And that's where we stand today at about 40%. So could Trump possibly use that to neutralize the conflicts of interest that Hillary Clinton would like to raise regarding Trump's companies and organizations, absolutely, I think he'll try and do that. But I'll tell you, I think that is a much more effective line against Hillary Clinton than Benghazi. If you're a voter that doesn't know much about Benghazi and hasn't already been persuaded that Hillary Clinton was complicit in some type of massive cover-up, no new information is really going to help you form a negative opinion about Hillary Clinton. Independents just don't get it when we really examine the polling. So I think that probably is a better line of attack for Trump and Republicans. Yes, sir.
Yeah. If should Trump win the Republican nomination, do you think, do you think the Republicans would advance a different candidate in a third party?
Yeah, that's a question that many are grappling with right now, but the problem is timing. If Donald Trump wraps up this nomination on June 7th and gets to 1237, which is a very possible achievement, there will be no time left for Republicans to put a third-party candidate on the ballot. If you look at some of the early filing deadlines, you need to gather hundreds of thousands of petitions in places like North Carolina and Texas by May. And so timing is really working to Donald Trump's advantage here. I also would think that it matters what type of independent candidate could possibly get on the ballot to face off against Trump and Clinton. If it were to be a Bloomberg, I think that actually would have hurt Hillary Clinton more. If it were hypothetically Marco Rubio who accepted some type of draft effort to get on the ballot, which I think is extremely unlikely, then would that hurt Trump? Absolutely. Did that answer your question?
We have time for one more question.
Okay, great.
There were some reports, true or not, I don't know, you would probably know about the vote. In certain precincts across the country was like 104% all voting for one candidate. And, many of us believe that there are certain areas that play with the vote. We hear about dead people voting in Chicago. Is there a lot of legs under that? Is there truth to it? And has things been done in each state to try to tighten that down so that, if there are games being played, that they won't be quite as prevalent in the next election?
I think the conspiracy theory on the left is that money buys elections and billionaires buy elections. And if that were true, we'd be looking at President Jeb Bush in November. I think the conspiracy on the right is that there are dead people voting and that Democrats are benefiting from precincts where 110% of people are voting. Personally, I look at numbers closely for a living all day. I haven't seen evidence of that happening on any kind of widespread scale or at all. And so, there are ways in which both parties try and play with the rules to gain advantages in this process. But I haven't seen evidence that that's the case in inner cities or anywhere else. But thank you all so very much for being an attentive and wonderful audience this afternoon. Please enjoy the rest of your time in Columbus, and thank you so very much for having me here.